Welcome to Automation's official design competition. In this video you are joining us for the roundtable discussion of the finalist designs in Category C, the 1955 to 1975 American family car. Your hosts Chris and Rob are joined by today's special guest and judge Secrane. He's a longtime member and admin of the automation community and is well known for his deep car knowledge and design skills in many different types of cars. We'll start by asking our guest judge a few questions first, and then we'll dive into a more in-depth analysis of each finalist in an open roundtable format.
So here we are in Category C, the 1955 to 1975 American family cars with our guest judge, Secrane.
Hello there.
So I guess my first question is, tell us a little bit about yourself in context of automation.
If you've been in the Discord, you might have seen me around. I sometimes post in Car Showcase after I've mustered up the courage to make a car, perhaps once a month. But yeah, no, I've been around the community for quite a few years now. I think I joined it in like mid 2018. At first I was a moderator and then now I'm an admin. And I think it's really great. I think we have a really good community going on.
Fantastic. So you've been around for quite a while, as you'd mentioned, getting on almost 5 years now. How did you find out about automation in the first place?
I actually found out about it way before then as well. Back when it was on CyEngine. Must have been around 2015 to 16. I think I was looking around on the Steam page about like games to make cars, because I've always had kind of an affinity for quote unquote fake cars after playing games like Ridge Racer, for example, where you have all these brands that do have sort of a universe or a lore, but they're not real cars. And I figured I want to make my cars, stuff that I want, stuff that I like. So I was looking around on the Steam page, and I think I just kind of stumbled upon the game, and it looked really interesting, so I bought it pretty much immediately. I didn't actually partake much in the community at all until a few years later, because I was in high school at the time, and I didn't really have a good computer. So I didn't really think much of it, and then I went into the military for a while, and that's actually when I started properly playing the game, because they had some computers on base in like the welfare area, as they called it. So I played it some there, and that's when I actually joined the Discord and everything.
Fantastic. That's definitely an interesting way of getting into the game. And actually, in a way, my story kind of mirrors that a little bit, in that I actually bought automation right in the very initial funding campaign in 2011. And
oh my God.
I started playing it right when the first public demo came out in 2012, and I didn't really actually interact a whole lot with the community for several years after that. It was probably about 2014 or 2015 when I actually started participating actively in the community. So there was definitely a bit of a gap there for sure. But again, I think my story probably parallels yours in that I found the community to be very helpful and engaging almost immediately, which was always nice.
Definitely, yeah. It was really nice just from the very beginning to kind of have someone to criticize and look at the cars that I made and tell me what I could do better. And that's really, really helped me, especially in the beginning when I was just starting out, to actually get to know what I could do better. And that's helped a lot.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the extension to that question is, how did you get interested in cars in the first place?
I have always loved cars. The very first toy that I got given when I was a kid was a 90s Mercedes toy car. I still have it somewhere, but just that immediately put an interest in cars. And I've always liked anything on wheels, but especially cars. They're just so interesting to me. It's just something it's always been a very big part of my life, whether in video games or in actual cars, car meets, car communities, anything related, really.
So tell us a little bit about your car history. I mean, apart from your 1990s Mercedes toy car, which seemingly everybody seems to have as the one little toy car, when they're given, that just sparks their interest.
I have got a car. For the longest time, obviously, it was toy cars. I had so many Hot Wheels growing up, and I still actually collect some toy cars, mostly older ones from the 50s and 60s. But as for actual cars, I've only ever had one car. It's the car that I have right now. It's a 2010 BMW 320d Touring X-Drive diesel. And it's not the most interesting, but it gets me where I'm going, and it does it pretty well. So overall, I'm pretty happy with that one.
Well, coming from North America, that is actually a very interesting car. Your the unicorn spec diesel manual wagon, pretty much, which
Yeah,
is
that's
all of our internet really just begs for.
yeah, I have heard that. Yeah, it's like over here in Europe, it's all over the place. Like diesel wagons are everywhere, especially in Norway. But I've heard many Americans when I mention what I drive, they go, "Whoa, it's a diesel and it's a manual and it's a wagon! Incredible!" It's so exciting. So to me, it's a very normal car, but it's nice to know someone's interested in it at least.
It doesn't matter how mundane it is, to you or whomever. There's always somebody who has a borderline fanatical interest in it. What kind of cars do you think you'd be most interested in? What era of cars would you be most interested in? And what are kind of your reasons why you're drawn to them?
That's a very wide scope. Very wide scope because I like pretty much anything, but I especially like things that are weird and unusual, things that you don't normally see, even things we may consider normal in a car in a certain era that's maybe abnormal in another era. Anything that's unusual is really interesting. So from a year standpoint, I'd say anything from about between 1910 to maybe the late 1990s is. I love the entire 20th century in automotive, both design and engineering and everything. There's so much different stuff. There's so much difference and there's so much unusual things, and everything is interesting in some way, I think.
Any highlights in that? Do you like to share with us?
I'm a big fan of the cylinder war in the 1930s, where Cadillac, for example, is putting in giant V16 engines in their cars just because 16 is a bigger number than the rest of the competition. I'm also a very big fan of muscle cars between about 1965 to about 73. Anything there is super interesting. I think if I had to pick a single favorite car of all time, 1970 Plymouth Superbird. That thing is just so different. It stands out from a mile away. It's such an interesting car. I love that thing.
They're super cool cars. I mean, as you said, it is just so different from everything else in the era. I mean, it's a muscle car, and yet it's something completely different unto itself, and that makes it really very special.
There's a specific Superbird that I think caught my interest in the car in the first place, and it was in 1970 or 71, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the USA, actually bought a Superbird. And, they immediately got asked, why are you buying a Superbird? Because not exactly a very environmentally friendly car. And they answered that they needed a car that could keep up with a Boeing 747 as it took off on the runway so they could measure its emissions. And just that story in itself is just hilarious. I love that car. It's so interesting.
That's a great story. I've never actually heard that before. That's cool, though.
Mm.
So in terms of automotive design, I think you kind of touched on a little bit, but sort of what are your favorite features and what draws you into a design in the first place?
I think anything that makes it really stand out in the crowd. As long as it's different from its competitors, it's interesting to me. And whether or not the public, maybe the public doesn't like it. So back to the Superbird, people didn't exactly love that thing, but it's different from everything else. So any sort of thing that makes it stand out, even if it's something small, it immediately draws my interest.
So when you look at a design, what do you feel makes for a good car design, and what do you feel makes for a bad car design?
You could probably boil it down to pretty much just two things, and that is cohesion and details. If a design flows well with both the body that it's on and the things that are on the body, and it then has the details on the body to back it up, then it could easily be a good car design, almost regardless of what it is. So I think as long as one puts enough time into the design and thinks properly about where, say, for example, in automation, fixtures should be, and then kind of creates a reason for them to be there almost, whether it's body molding around it or bumper bars or anything, I think cohesion and detailing, that's what really makes a car. As for bad design, I suppose it's just the absence of those two. For example, putting square headlights on a brand new modern car might not be the best choice, and maybe tail fins on a car where, tail fins aren't exactly popular right now. So, for example, tail fins on a modern car, it's not cohesive, and it might just feel plopped on there, which I don't think would make for a very good design.
Definitely. Good answers, thank you, by the way. I guess our final question is, and this is one we've been posing to all of our guests, and it produces some fairly interesting results from time to time, is if you could work for any car designer or any company right now as a car designer, which one do you think you'd want to work for?
Probably Dodge. And mostly just because they make cool muscle cars, and I like muscle cars, like I mentioned. So I know that new concept that they brought out, the Daytona, was, a bit controversial, but personally, I think it looks amazing. It's it's a really good way to bring the retro modern, which is something that I also like, into, it's a way to bring the retro design styles into the modern age. So I think my answer would probably be Dodge.
That's an interesting answer. Definitely not quite it's different than what just about all of our other celebrity judges have said. A lot of them have been saying that, the Porsches, the BMWs, Hyundai, and to choose Dodge is an interesting choice. But I do agree that they're doing some very interesting stuff here coming up in the near future. So
I've always been a sucker for like the retro modern stuff. So like when the new Mustang came out in around 2005, and it actually looked kind of like the old one. And then, Chevy brought out the Camaro and Dodge brought out the Challenger. And I think when they brought out the Challenger, I think that car, the 2008 Challenger, is one of the best designs of all time, because it looks like the 1970 Challenger, but it's new and it's sleek, and I think it looks great. And they've still kind of kept that up now. I mean, sadly, the Charger and Challenger are going out of production now, but I'm pretty sure they'll be able to follow it up quite well with what they've been showing off.
absolutely. I'm thinking it's going to be a very exciting time with them and with their new designs. How about we go look at some cars?
Yeah, sounds good. It is quintessentially 70s, is what I want to say to this. The color scheme is spot on, I would say, with the kind of bright body, and then the darker vinyl roof that is very, very popular and very appropriate for the 70s. So is the body as well. Very good choice for sure. It's very good looking for its era. It fits in the era.
So I look at this car and I think it's generally quite well done. The body does kind of a lot of the heavy lifting here because it's such a distinctive shape. But my thought is, it's not really so much of a family car as it's more of a luxury car. And it's very appropriate for the design brief window, 55 to 75, but is it really appropriate as a quote-unquote family car? I'm not 100% sure. The details that are here, though, like, they're really quite nice. I'm just gonna swing around to the front. I mean, that front end is absolutely, it's exactly what you'd see in like an early 1970s sort of luxury limousine.
I can definitely agree with that. I'd say especially the outer lights, because they have sort of the rounded top of the fins, but the lights themselves are completely square. I think they kind of get cut off a bit quickly. Might be a bit nitpicking as well. And I wanted to mention, if you could swing around to the front, the bumpers, I think, leave a bit to be desired. There's not really a lot of things going on the bumper itself. It's just kind of this big block of chrome, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with a big block of chrome, but I think in the 70s especially, the manufacturers really like to put in a lot of detailing on the bumpers to make them stand out a bit, and I think this car could have done well with that.
So overall, I think this is a really premium looking build, and that, as Chris was pointing out, is maybe a little bit to the side of the category, but still decent enough. We will have some other cars in here as well, which might be slightly off, so I can't really fault it. It would certainly house a family in there, and comfortably so. Yeah, but I do agree. Overall, the body does a lot of the heavy lifting here in terms of getting it the right style. Color choice beautiful. and I really think it's from front to back really thematic and accurate in that. And I do quite like how the back is framed by the taillights, and I agree it could have done with just 2 exhausts instead of 4. But the subtle line on the top, and then the horizontal long taillights, I think they are really making for a good look back here. And yes, I agree that the rounded fins, or the hint of fins there, don't quite house those taillights well. But overall, I really can't see how this isn't a super solid all-round design that just doesn't do quite enough to be a wowzer.
I think that's a very good way to put it, actually. Yeah, it does a lot of very good stuff, but it doesn't do it quite well enough, so to say. So it's a very good design, but I think I agree with pretty much exactly what you just said there.
Yeah, I agree. It's most of the way there, but it just needs a few more things to really put it over the top. One thing I just noticed here looking from the front 3/4 view is it could really use just a little bit of detailing and a little bit of sort of visual interest on the enormous hood that this car has. Like maybe
The hood is,
a spine, running from front to rear, right
yeah.
down the center or something. Just something to break up that huge expanse of flat metal. If the bumpers just wrapped around a little bit more front and rear, it would be really fantastic. And then maybe just a couple little more details here and there. I seem to recall that a lot of cars of this year and of this size had sort of the side turning lights that you'd sort of nose out into the road and at night and actually illuminate down the road a little bit. So something like that would be, just take this to the next level.
One thing that I'm noticing in general is that it has a very consistent density of fixtures. Apart from maybe this vast plain of empty hood, if you look around, it doesn't seem to be really trying too hard, and I quite appreciate that. It is not over-designed in any way, but it feels confident in how it presents itself with, I don't need all that bling. I'm good as is. I'm the executive.
That is actually that's a good point as well. Yeah, it doesn't. I feel like it doesn't try too hard either, so to say. It doesn't, like you said, it isn't cluttered in any way. It isn't. It's pleasing to look at because there's enough going on, but it just needs to, what is going on should have maybe been done a little better, with a little more care taken to where fixtures went and what kind of fixtures. So overall, I think it's quite good, but not quite there.
Yeah, I couldn't have summed it up better myself.
This is one of the ones that definitely caught my eye. This one has a lot going on, but it's done so well. This is very, very 50s in a really, really good way. So it has pretty much everything you would expect from a 1950s car. It's got a lot of chrome. It's got heavy bumpers, lots of detailing. I'm a big fan of the fins on it that are built into the door as well. And I mean, this is genuinely very, very good. The only thing I might nitpick about is the detailing, and that this is very, very fine detailing as well. If you could swing it around to the front. One thing that I did notice is the bumper bars that form the headlight casings don't quite hang together. Maybe they might have just been placed a little quick, but I mean, for this car, I mean, everything here is really, really excellent, and the only real detriment, if it even is that, is just the very, very fine detailing. I think everything else is really, really fantastic. There's a lot of work that's been put into this, clearly, and it shows a result. This is very, very nice.
Yeah, I agree. This is generally a very well done design. very nicely considered. This is exactly what you'd see as a family hauler in like the late 1950s. It's absolutely period perfect, and the choice of colors is very, very good too. That sort of lightly metallic off-white it's exactly what you expect to see. There are, as Secrane mentioned, there are a few little details here and there that are perhaps implemented a little bit sloppily, and I think something that disappoints me a little bit about it, and looking at it a little bit closer now, is the front bumper doesn't really have a whole lot of themes that carry on through the rear of the car. There's a little bit of an inconsistency there, and I'm really not 100% convinced about the rear tail light and rear chrome treatment. It's a little bit heavy, I think, for the era. It would have been like there definitely would have been a lot of chrome, but I think this is maybe too much. And I think the way that the lights are shaped are not really what you'd expect to see. And I'm really not 100% convinced on what's going on in the rear tailgate here. There's some weird stuff that's...
I think, yeah, I agree with what you said there. There's a bit of an inconsistency from the front to the rear. And the minor detailing probably could have been better. And now that you mention it, yeah, the tailgate does have some funny stuff going on there. I'm not entirely sure exactly what is going on there. Those big chrome latches, something on the sides there. I'm not really sure what those are for, if they're just there for looks. And yeah, the tail lights as well. I think they probably could have been better with a type of, like something maybe inspired by rocketry or, the space age in the 1950s. So, but again, it's nitpicking. It's still a really, really great car. There's a lot of really good stuff here. And
to me, the car from both front and side is very stunning and super appropriate for what we're expecting here. Interior color there as well, although I would like to point out that the glass might be a bit on the transparent side here, making it stick out maybe a wee bit much, although it does work really well with the color choice, and also with the white wall tires there, of course. The front, slightly on the messy side in places, to me at least. The sides, pretty much spot on, and I really liked your comment about the rear there, how the fins are implemented even into the door, gives it this very typical shape. But now, let me tell you, the rear isn't a complete abomination. I was so disappointed when I saw the rear. It is a clusterfuck. So let me tell you why. This looks like a modern diffuser underneath that car. These shapes down to the lower end, those are very modern shapes in comparison to what you would expect here. The sides, this double split taillight piece just doesn't suit the design overall. Then these teardrop shapes and the cross, I have no clue what they are supposed to be in terms of design here. I think this is a complete mess in terms of the rear. Now towards the positive sides, if you look from the sides, again, I would like to point out that the roof rack there, perfect framing with the sides, beautifully done, absolutely stunning. And that line, super tasteful, together with the roof line going down towards the rear wheel, that little chrome line, the side line along that goes from the front with a little bend just over the wheel and then all the way back to the center, towards the center of the rear wheel. That is some of the most tasteful stuff that I've seen. It is stunningly beautiful and super well implemented, but I have no clue what happened to the rear there.
the front end is, if a bit messy, it's appropriate. It's good. It's good looking. Maybe a little bit of a sloppy detailing there. The overall shape of the car is fantastic, especially with that hip implemented into the door. Very well done there. The roof rack, as you mentioned, Rob, incredibly well placed, and it's appropriate for the kind of car it is. But it somewhat falls apart on the rear end, where there seems to be a lot of different ideas trying to kind of mesh together. It's not very consistent with the front. It doesn't quite live up to the rest of the car, but I mean, overall, it's still an incredibly well done car. And now that I just remembered it as well, the front wheel arch where that vent inlet is integrated into the fender, both on the rear as well. There, actually, I see now, to kind of give it an edge inwards. Really, really appropriate as well from the 50s. So I'd say it's a very, very good car that loses a bit on both detailing and the rear end, but overall it's still an incredibly well done car. I think the main vibe I get from this car is that it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. Seems to be a lot of inspiration taken from Cadillac, but if you swing around to the front here is very early, mid 1960s. It's got integrated headlights. It's got quite a square look to it, but then the back end has these huge fins that were most popular in the late 1950s, and the overall body shape as well is quite 50s. So I think it kind of has it does a lot of things very well. It's got a nice color. It's got quite nice wheel selection. I think the bumpers wrap around, at least, especially on the back. But I think it doesn't quite know what it wants to be.
Yeah, I feel this design has somewhat missed the mark in a lot of ways. As Secrane pointed out, it doesn't really seem to have any kind of consistent era to it. It's like it has the fins from that 1955 to 1960 period where they were really super popular, but the rest of the car it does feel very 1960s. And I'd also like to point out that even with the 1960s sort of look to it, it doesn't really have enough chrome on it. Like, this is an era where if you're building a car like this, you go absolutely crazy with the chrome, and it just doesn't have that. It kind of feels a little bit like this car has been modified. Like, it's kind of almost like a custom car from later on, where they shave off a lot of the details and shave off a lot of the chrome and just make it sort of really clean looking. And I don't think I'm not really sure that works very well. And I'm just going to swing around to the rear here. I really am not a fan with what's going on back here, from the chrome strips on the trunk lid to the lettering. The taillights don't really seem to fit with. They're almost towards the end of their design brief, like sort of late 60s, early 70s kind of taillights. It's just all over the place, unfortunately.
The first impression that I got was that it seems to be a really sleek design, and I have by no means anywhere near as much experience with these kinds of cars as you guys have, of course. But I very much appreciate the flow of the body shape. It is beautiful, and that coupled with a little bit of more sparse detailing, I think is almost a modern approach to designing a car like this. And if you go to the three-quarter front, I think this look, to me, it looks really appealing. And I do agree, of course, that the rear is not quite as good, but the front figurine there sitting on the bonnet, and the strips of chrome along the side, just it feels right, that part. I really like also the fuel cap, how it is put in there, and in general, it doesn't seem to be over designed in any way. It might have a little bit of wrong age placement for the or era placement for the fixtures, but overall, the squinting a little, I quite like the design, even though it has its flaws.
Like both of you said, there is ups and downs. There is good stuff going on here. It's certainly very sleek. Yeah, I think a lot of the smaller details as well, like the chrome filler cap there, that's quite nice. The chrome line along the side as well, very nice. The little hood ornament, it's very fitting, and the chrome lines on top of the fenders and the radio antennas on the back as well. A lot of the smaller details are quite nice, but overall, for me, it comes back to I don't think it knows what it wants to be or when it wants to be. So it feels like it's all over the place from maybe 1956 to 66 almost. It has this both squared and rounded look. It's just a bit confused as to what it wants to be. So there's good stuff going on, but I think it loses a lot in consistency. One thing that I want to mention that I've actually seen on a couple cars are the center lock wheels. And they certainly look very 50s, but I'm not really sure what they're doing on big cars, like big sedans and family and luxury cars, especially family cars here. Center lock wheels were never really a thing on big cars. They were very reserved for sports cars and race cars and so on. So I really would have liked to see just some hubcaps instead of these center locks.
Yeah, that's a very good point actually, is that they tended to be on lighter cars, and you'd have the center locks on cars like this only if they've been really heavily customized, I think. Sort of especially into the lowrider culture, which that often came a lot later than when these cars were designed, and kind of made their own choices and their own decisions with regards to styling and how they modified their cars.
This is very, very nice. Very, very 70s, especially with the kind of yacht window there as well. It's one of the first things that caught my attention. That was very, very popular at the time. It's got a lot of detailing going on, and I'm a really, really big fan personally of the chrome line that runs along the fenders through the doors and to the back, because it kind of encapsulates the car. It kind of completes that line from the top of the front marker lights to the top of the rear. So already I get a feeling of consistency. A lot of care has been put into this design. There's a lot of body molding here to make it kind of stand out. I think maybe it's a little messy on the side, just because there's a lot of body molding. Like I said, it kind of feels like it keeps going. It's flat and then it goes out, and then it's flat again, then it goes out, and then it's flat and then it goes out, and over again. But I think overall it's very, very well done. Now we do see a return of the center lock wheels again, and I think maybe the wheels are a little big. It sits very high. Now cars back then did sit quite high, to be fair, but a lot of the time they'd have quite small wheels. But overall, I think this is really good stuff in general. It's very late 60s, early 70s. It's got big chrome bumpers. I really like the way if you swing around to the rear, the lights are kind of almost incorporated into the whole chrome lining of the back. So there's a lot of really, really great stuff going on here. I'm a big fan of this one personally.
Yeah, I quite like this one as well, and from a design standpoint, I think it's pretty much exactly what you want to see. But my thought again is, unfortunately, this body is so unmistakably premium. Like this is very much a limousine rather than sort of a big family car, and especially with the styling that's going on here, it really does feel like it's maybe a step above kind of the design window. I mean, we were looking for family cars primarily, and this is more what you'd expect to see a CEO being driven around in at the time, and just pure luxury, just pure, you've got the biggest and meanest looking car on the road, and I think it's not quite appropriate for the brief. That said, though, everything that is going on here is absolutely perfect. I think I agree with Secrane's comment that maybe there's a little bit too much body molding going on. I mean, they definitely would have done some in the era, but I think this has maybe taken it maybe a step too far. Perhaps one of the rows of the body molding could disappear, and I think it would really dramatically improve the way the design looks. One thing I'm really a big fan of, and this is just a tiny little touch that just really puts the car in, period, is I really like the front offset license plate. That's exactly what they would do in a car like this, and it just makes it feel more authentic. I like the scripting on the side of the car as well, the 6th Avenue. That's kind of a fun nod to the Chrysler 5th Avenue, of course. So I like how that's done. That's very tasteful, and it's repeated in the front headlight as well on the driver's side, which is definitely a period thing to do as well. And the rear of this car is just stunning overall. I couldn't ask for more. It's just, I'm not 100% convinced that this car really fits the brief, unfortunately.
I really do like the design overall, but I fully agree with the sides. I tend to ask for strong lines there, but here I just got 3 instead of 1, and maybe 2 would have been great. But this is a little bit too much. And then when you swing to the straight front view, I would say there's too little going on there. Just look at the hood and how massive and sleek it is. Just a hint of molding there might have helped it, although that might be not quite right for the era. I'm not quite sure. But some structure there, something that makes that 15 square meters of hood not quite as uniform and more consistent with what I see on the sides. That would have been quite nice. But I fully agree on the rear of this car. It's really beautiful and consistent with the front, as the front sides also stick out that way, and this has just such an integrated and natural feel to how the taillights are put in there. The only thing that I wonder, and I would like to hear your comments on this, would they have cut off the background for the text there in the middle, as much as you can see here, the white background, because it makes it harder to read and much less prominent than it could have been. I see it's symmetrical and stuff, so it makes sense, but what are your thoughts on that?
Personally, what I would do is simply make the text smaller so that it would fully fit inside of what I assume is the reverse light. I don't think there's any specific regulations against putting it in there, but yeah, I think just making it smaller so that it actually fit, it might make it look a little more appropriate. Or I mean, even then, what I actually would have done personally would be to move the text up onto the trunk and then instead have a very spaced out, type text instead there. That was very popular at the time.
Something I'd kind of like to point out as well from looking at from the front is it does feel like the top is a slightly different color. It's very hard to see because it's very similar shade, but it's just a little bit of kind of an off white, trending a little bit towards the cream side, and I'm not really, I just don't know if they would have done a color combination quite like that.
I can't really seem to see the difference in the side view there. Do you mean it's a like pure side?
I think if you swing the camera around to the front, you can see the roof is like a very, very slightly darker.
Yeah, it's eggshell instead of white, yeah.
I think if it was a little bit bolder, like even trending more towards like a beige, I think it would have been a much more appropriate choice. And it would have stood out better too.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've kind of noticed, at least from personal experience, is that both white, like completely white cars and completely black cars don't really photograph that well a lot of the time. It's certainly possible, but I think maybe if this car had been more of a beige color than with maybe a brown roof, it might have brought out a lot more that we perhaps can't even see right now. I mean, right now from where we're looking at it, the hood is just a complete white chasm. And so is the trunk and the roof from this angle. It's kind of hard to see exactly what's going on here, so I think maybe it would have been better in a beige or brown color. My immediate thought is it looks very Australian, especially with this body. It's kind of hard to mistake it because this is a Ford Falcon body. Something weird going on with the headlights. Let's look at the front. I'm not sure if that's a bug or how that's happened, but there seems to be some sort of tearing problem or cutout problem on the outer headlights there. Further on the front, I think the grille is quite empty. It's just kind of open completely. And I mean, this certainly did happen at the time. Some cars do have quite open grilles, but I don't really think it works when it's that flat. The shaker hood as well. Not too sure about that one, on this car at least. That would probably fit more on something like a pony car or just a flat-out muscle car, so it was certainly possible to have family muscle cars at the time, but I'm not really entirely sure if this one works that well. If you look at the side there, it's got some body molding on the side skirts there. That the car is very square, but there's this kind of rounded piece there that I don't think fits all that well. I do like the detailing on the C pillar there with the flag. That's quite well implemented. Let's look at the rear. This is not good, unfortunately. The rear is not good. Look at the back from the straight angle. Those taillights and that very big piece of chrome I don't think work very well. Because you've got the outer taillights that are vertical with the indicator facing outwards, but then you've got the reverse lights facing downwards on the inner taillights. I think an improvement could already be made just by flipping them 90 degrees to face outwards instead. And I think that chrome piece as well, with the 4 vertical bars that go there, it just isn't that cohesive, in my opinion. And it's got some cool stuff going on. I do like 4-door muscle cars. They can work as family cars as well, but I think this one's just, it's a bit messy. So it's got some cool stuff going on, but it's just a bit messy.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with that. This has a very, it starts off as a really good idea. I mean, a 4-door muscle car is very cool. And it's not really something you see a whole lot of, certainly in the American family car market. Most muscle cars tended to be 2-door cars. And to actually make a family car that's also a muscle car, that's a very almost unique take, and certainly in the time period, it was very few and far between. But I do agree with Secrane that there is some messiness and inconsistency going on. The front definitely feels like it's very, very flat, and it's not really the most appealing treatment. And it is very unfortunate that there's obviously either some tearing or cutaway issues with the headlights as well that kind of seem a little bit odd. I would like to point out as well that I'm not really sure about how the exhausts are treated. It's not really. You did see cutout exhausts fairly frequently in the 60s and 70s, but it was far more common to just have a straight exhaust tip beneath the bodywork. So I could maybe excuse that a little bit, but it's not really kind of what I would expect to see in a car of this era. The other thing I'd like to point out in the rear is that all the lettering is, as Secrane pointed out, there's this kind of some messy choices that were done, and the lettering is definitely one of them. I think it's very unbalanced. The Ocelot branding for the model name is very large and very, it's maybe quite a bit too large, especially in comparison with the badge in the center line. And the text about the 427 engine powered by Cosworth or whatever that is, I think that probably at least should be moved to the other side just to sort of put a bit of balance to it, because it feels very heavy on the passenger side.
Yeah, overall this car just felt completely different to all the others in that it's has a very aggressive nature to it, in that it doesn't feel at all like a family car to me when I look at it. Quite muscle car, and as such it does do pretty well overall. Like the general shape seems to check out and stuff, but yeah, it doesn't feel like a family car. Also, just a question there, like what is this winglet doing on the rear? That seems very odd as a choice for that era, doesn't it?
I think you did see some wings sometimes on performance cars at the time, but I agree. It was normally they would omit it from the 4-door versions. I'm not an expert on 4-door muscle cars personally, but I think that the choice in wing is a little strange, because this is a very square car, but the wing is kind of rounded off. I think the wing could have worked if it was maybe a ducktail wing or something just more square.
Yeah, I think something trending more towards like just a spoiler, like a little, almost like a gurney flap would have done, well, maybe not quite as aggressive as a gurney flap, but just a little flap right at the end of the trunk lid would have been far more appropriate.
I wouldn't have reacted to that much at all, apart from saying, yep, that looks like a muscle car then, but this looks way too modern. I also agree that the taillights there are a bit of an odd choice. It seems to not be quite the right design for compared to the front. I do like, however, how clean the car overall looks. You could argue that it's under-designed in places, but like the side view especially really lets the car shape talk for itself. And while it doesn't frame it all too nicely, because it doesn't have anything down there apart from the body molding that you've pointed out is a little weird, I think the very focused nature of that one line going across works pretty well for the side at least, and brings home that it is maybe a little bit more of a kind of performance vehicle here. I still don't see it as a family vehicle at all, though.
One comment now that we can actually see it in the photo. This is just a tip for every designer. When you're doing the paint, unless you want them to be red, change the brake paint, because you can see here the front brakes are red, and that didn't become popular until about 30-40 years after this car came out. So I'm not going to fault the designer for that, really, because it's quite hard to miss, but just a general tip for designers: unless you want them to be red, paint the brakes, even if it's just steel. It makes it look a little bit better.
Yeah, that is a good point. Now that you pointed that out, Secrane, it's almost like my eye is drawn towards that, and it's hard to ignore the bright red caliper. And I agree fully that this car probably would have had steel or like silver painted brake calipers from the factory, maybe black, but they didn't really start doing colors for, as you said, probably until at least until the late 1980s, early 1990s. You have a few cars here and there that would be before that, but you wouldn't really see that much in mainstream cars.
One thing that I do want to mention that's a positive is I like the line between, well, I say line, but I like the consistency between the car's paint, which is blue, and the interior, which is also blue. And that was quite popular at the time, to kind of match the color inside and outside. So that's something that I do like. That does look nice. Well, it's certainly a green car, both inside and out. I like the side detailing. I'm assuming it's supposed to be wooden paneling. It's quite well done. I maybe would have liked to see the chrome line also go along the fenders, though I understand that might have been a bit hard to do. But there's a lot of very good stuff going on here. Maybe a bit of an odd wheel choice. Now that I just look at that, that's more of a muscle car type wheel. But it's got a lot of good stuff going on. You've got the roof rack, very appropriate for a wagon. The color scheme is very appropriate for a wagon, if you look at the front now. Good stuff going on here as well. I like the grille fits nicely in between the headlights. I like the indicators and the marker lights below the bumper. Even the license plate is actually accurate. California used blue plates between, I think, 1968 till 82, I think. So that's a nice detail that I really like. I maybe would have liked to see some chrome mirrors. A bit odd that they're body colored. That didn't become popular until quite a while later. Swing around to the side, if you don't mind. Good stuff going on here as well, I think. The marker lights are appropriate. You've got orange on the front and red on the back. That's the regulations say. Not bad. If you could look at the rear. Not bad here either. Not too sure if I like the writing. The Gallivanter there, it says. It's a bit big. I would have made it smaller and spaced it out more, like you've done with the actual badge up on the left there. But overall, I think it's a fairly good design. It does a lot of things very well, especially in regulation sense and a lot of detailing. I think if you look at the side again, I think maybe I would wanted the bumpers to go around the sides a little better. I know that's kind of hard to do, but it feels like they kind of just stretch out to the side and just kind of abruptly end. So I would have liked to see them more squared off there. But overall, I quite like this. It's quite good.
Yeah, I agree that there's a lot of good stuff going on in this design. Like, I think the color choices are absolutely perfect, although I'm not really sure it would be like living inside an avocado inside the interior necessarily. I mean, there'd definitely be continuation of the green, but everything in the interior is very, very green. I can't really fault it for that because, of course, we're not really marking on that, but just an observation on that. I will agree with Secrane that the wheels those are more appropriate wheels on a muscle car. And especially since this is, if you can believe it, kind of more of a compact wagon body style for the time period, I don't think they would have had wheels like that on this car because it just doesn't really feel appropriate. Those would be reserved for the very biggest and most powerful cars in a company's lineup, or even like aftermarket treatment on a lot of cars. And this probably would have just had steel wheels or hubcaps or something on it instead. One thing I'd like to point out is I'm not really 100% sure of the headlight treatment. The sort of black mask around the headlights really feels like it's more of a performance car. And I just can't really conceive this car, just looking at it, as being a quote-unquote performance car really in any way, especially with the 3.5 liter badging on it. You'd assume that if this is sort of a late, like right at the very end of the design brief, like a 1974, 1975 car, that this would just be, it'd have that 3.5 liter engine, but it would just be the wheeziest, most anemic little engine you could possibly imagine, with like 90 or 100 horsepower. And it's some of the looks on the car kind of cut a check that its performance just really can't cash, I don't think. I will also agree with Secrane that the choice of not just the color of the mirrors, but I think the choice of the shape of the mirrors is a little bit off-putting. It doesn't really match with the rest of the design, and it's a little bit anachronistic. And yeah, I think also you can't really see it from the 3/4 view, but if you look at the side view, this car has a massive hood bulge. Again, kind of writing a check that its performance can't cash, I don't think.
What I do really like about this one is the framing from the side that we see here with the chrome bits. And it looks really clean in that way. One thing I would like to point out about the color choice, though, is I feel the brown is too close in brightness to the green. I think it would have worked better if the brown would have been a little darker than this. And also if the interior would have been just plain, let's say dark grey or something, would have made the rest of the car pop a little bit more. But the framing with the chrome on top, also with the rails up on top, really beautifully done. So nicely crafted. Then front and rear, I quite, in general, like the look of it. I like the badging that is going on here with the largely spaced letters. I think there's some little inconsistency there between the A and the R, and then the other distances with the letters, and it doesn't seem quite perfect. And then on the rear, as you've already pointed out, the font choice there just doesn't quite work. And I don't enjoy the choice of having 4 red lights on either side. I think here it would have put a little bit more detail in it and some nicer look if that was slightly different, with one of them being a reverse light, for instance. Not saying that necessarily an indicator needs to be in there too. That would make it quite busy looking then. But I think that would have worked a little. Are they those actual reversing lights underneath the bumper bar?
I think they are as well. I'm not entirely sure, but they look like they would be.
Then maybe just putting the indicators as one of those 4 on top would have worked quite well. Because do you agree that 4 of them looks a little, mundane?
Yeah, I agree with that. The American regulations when it comes to rear indicators is very weird because you're allowed to have red indicators that also function as brake lights, which looks quite confusing. But I still agree with you that I think one of them being either a reverse light or an indicator, or even just completely removing one of them and keeping 3 on each side as well would have made it look nicer.
My thought on that is if you actually broke up, because the red taillights are actually quite a large fixture without really a whole lot going on there. I think if you broke that shape up a little bit with some chrome bars, it would have worked a lot better. Like, keep all 4 units, but have, say, a chrome bar running down the middle. So you basically have 2 of them that are maybe dedicated indicators or brake lights, and 2 of them that are sort of parking lights, like maybe the inner ones. Just something to... I think the big issue is it's just such a large, contiguous shape of red that it needs something to kind of break it up a little bit. And it's funny, Rob, that you mentioned the font and the model name. I'd also like to point out that the font changes for the badging. So you have the font on the front for Markley, the company name. And then you have a different font for Markley in the rear. So that's a little bit inconsistent, I think.
That is definitely true. Now that you say it, it's all over the place. Oh, one thing that I'm noticing here is that the theme with the interior being all green somehow reminds me of like green on green is either more military or more off-road. And like I can't quite make out why that might be, but it doesn't quite feel family to me if it's that green and green.
I will say that was, in a very brief period in the early 1970s, that was the color for everything. You'd get avocado green appliances in your house. You'd get avocado green cars on the road. It was the trendy color at the time. So I'm not saying it was a good trend, but it was the trend.
1970s car trends were very strange. There was a very brief window where everything needed to be the same color. Like, obviously you'd still have the chrome on the outside and maybe there'd be wooden paneling, but I remember reading a while ago about AMC. They did one of their cars, I forget if it was the Gremlin or the Pacer, but they did a collaboration with Levi's, the people who made jeans, and the entire car was blue from the inside and the outside. The dashboard, the steering wheel, the seats, the doors, everything was blue. So I think it's a really terrible color, like this green, but that's not, I'm not talking about the car. This green is not a pretty color, but I think it's an appropriate color, both for the inside and the outside, even if it's not necessarily good looking, but I think that might be some of the point.
One thing that in general needs to apply is, I believe is a good rule of thumb for designers. If you are unsure of what color choice you should pick as your secondary color, always also try a just grayscale image of what you're trying to design. And if those are the same kinds of gray, you should probably change the tonality a little bit so that it's either darker or lighter, and see if that works better. If they're too samey, while you don't directly see it, it can cause all kinds of problems in terms of contrast.
Well, the color is a fairly appropriate choice, I suppose. It might be a bit fluorescent, but it's certainly a 1950s type color. It's got the shape. Obviously, the body helps with this. It's got many of the right kinds of fixtures. It's got fairly appropriate door handles. It's got okay mirrors. It's got chrome bumpers. It's got some chrome detailing. But I don't think this design holds up very well in general. The bumpers are just a single fixture, at least on the front. The side detailing as well. I mean, there's a line that goes from the front fender there onto the door, and then it just kind of stops. There's a seemingly different chrome fixture below that on the fender. Two of them actually, and then you've got this very massive side skirt chrome, which is then followed up and to the back on the rear door, but it kind of stands up very high without flowing with the body, the shape at all. The wheel color and choice is a bit odd. I would have definitely gone with something like a hubcap. The tail lights are just kind of plopped on there. You can see some tearing there on the tail light, which could have been covered up by patches. It's got 4 exhausts. It could have done better with only 1 or 2. And this rear is, I mean, right now we're looking at maybe 5 or 6 fixtures. There needs to be something in the middle. There's no space for a license plate. There's no reverse lights. I don't think they needed them at the time in the 50s either way, but still, it's just completely empty on the back here. If you look at the front as well, it's got a very distinctive 1950s type front. I do like the little hood piece there on top of the grille. That kind of V was quite popular in the 50s. I think it might be a bit big, but it's appropriate at least. The bullet grille is fairly appropriate as well, but I wish it had more detailing. I also, the grille is very round, but then you've got these very square indicator lights and housings on the side. The bumper doesn't stick out far enough, and there's not enough going on. I think the headlights are a bit small, and that chrome line on the hood that goes up to the windshield is very thick, and that kind of line had gone completely out of date by the late 1940s, early 1950s, and it's not appropriate for this car.
Well, with everything being said there, I would like to talk a little bit about the meta here, because well, obviously this isn't really that great a design, but how come that it is in the finals? So maybe it photographed very nicely from the front and had a really nice photo, so that people were thinking like, oh yeah, that could have a shot at it. It has a nice standout color and everything. Overall, I think this is much more akin to something that you would have seen in our previous photo competition. Which was, well, back in the olden days without 3D fixtures and anything. And yes, lots of situations where you would think, that looks a bit like my first car design, and it's not great. It's not holding up. So I had it like this is by far the car that I had the lowest score for, and it's a little unfortunate because from the front, just looking from the front, first glance, there could be something to it. But yes, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, the ideas that the builder has going on, it's a good start, but that's really about all you can say, is that they didn't really see it through to the end.
The one thing that I can say that is appropriate is the wheel width is good. It would appear to be on cross-ply tires, which were very thin, and they're inset into the body. But other than that, everything that's going on with the actual body and the fixtures on it, it just doesn't quite work.
That is almost a little bit comedic then. The car that has the, let's say, most questionable design has the most correct wheels, yes. Although, apart from the color choice of them being body colored, maybe not. But yes.
Good stuff going on here. It's very, I would say I would place it around 1970 to 71. I'm a big fan of the chrome around the car, especially how it kind of envelops both the front and the rear. If you swing around to the front, kind of encasing the entire front end in chrome was very popular at the time. So I think it's quite a nice design choice. Though with that being said, if you go to the side, I think the chrome line that follows through on the side of the car is very thick. It's more appropriate over the fender, like over the wheel arches, but the actual line on the front fender and through the doors and to the back, it's very thick. One thing that I do like, though, is the pseudo wooden paneling and the little beige line that follows it over the top as well. It's quite a nice little detail there. With the back, though, I'm not entirely sold on those taillights. They look just a bit odd to me. The shape doesn't really make that much sense. If if this was my car, I probably just would have used the entire space that's left above the L-shaped taillights. I probably just would have used those, or I probably just would have made them that kind of height, but then gotten rid of the way they swing upwards on the outside there. Also, the one thing I do want to say, big fan of the handle there on the back. Nice little detail. The font choice here, though, is very outdated, especially that Kingdom Strider. That's more of a almost 1930s, 1940s font. Even the writing on the middle there is a bit Art Deco, a bit too old. You got the marker lights on the front, the orange ones, and the red ones on the back, though they seem to be different sizes. That's a bit unusual. Usually you'd have them the same size. Though I do like the mirrors are good. It's got a nice little radio antenna there. I think it appears to have some vents in front of the windshield. That's quite nice for the air conditioning, though the windshield wipers seem to be missing. Maybe they're hidden, I'm not sure, but I would have liked to see them. And I think maybe the bumper, the front bumper especially, could have stuck out a little further. I know that it wasn't really necessary at the time until 1973 when new regulations came in, but I think it would have made it look a little nicer and not quite as flat as it is here. But overall, I quite like this one.
Yeah, I generally agree that this has some very nice stuff going on. I like the treatment of the front. I do agree that with Secrane that maybe the front bumper could have stuck out just a little bit more because, as he said, it wasn't necessarily appropriate at the time to have like really huge bumpers, if this is a sort of a 1970, 71 kind of car. But at the same time, they still would have had enough bumper that if you did run into something, you wouldn't be doing a whole lot of metalwork damage to the rest of the car. Especially in this car, it looks like if it hits something, it would be leading with the hood, and that would be kind of expensive to fix. And even then, they recognize that that's not really ideal from an insurance or an ownership perspective, that if you did have a little bit of a parking lot argument, that you'd have to send your car off for lots and lots of expensive body work. I generally like the idea of the faux wood paneling, how it's done here, especially the two-tone lighter and darker, but the choice of texture is it really takes me out of it, unfortunately. Like, this is not an appropriate material, I don't think, to simulate wood grain, and it just looks odd from here. It looks like paint was applied over a very rough surface rather than it actually being wood paneling, unfortunately. I will echo as well that the chrome strip that runs from front to rear is maybe a little bit too thick. It should have been probably about the same thickness as the lighter colored wood up above, maybe a little bit thicker, but not a whole lot. And it is a little bit messy going around the wheel arches, unfortunately, which kind of takes away from it. I do like what's going on the roof. The roof rack and the roof rails are quite nice, and I really like the wind deflector over the rear glazing. That's really cool. Again, sort of a similar theme with the rear. I think the bumper could have stuck out just a little bit more, just to provide a little bit more protection and build a little bit more body down low, just to kind of reinforce what's going on. The taillights, I think, as Secrane mentioned, they're not hugely appealing. I think at very minimum, what I probably would have done if it was my car is actually had the red taillight run all the way across from one side to the other with no interruptions, and then maybe had the Kingdom Strider in a little bit of a different font, but actually in the red taillight material itself. Also, it is a little bit of a strange choice having the black rear valence, especially in comparison with the faux wood paneling on the sides. I don't think that's something they would have necessarily done. They probably would have continued the wood motif all the way around the car, or actually made it body color, but I don't think they would have gone to a completely separate color that doesn't really appear anywhere else. Yeah, generally it's a fairly solid design with a few misses here and there, is my thought.
I would like to point out the general color theme here, beautifully visible from the side, as you have this bright, almost a little yellowish color, and then the dark blue on the inside, very nicely contrasting, and then the warm, not wood on the side. just fitting really nicely to that. One thing that I want to point out as some inconsistency, if you swing around to the front, to the straight front, when I look at this, the first thing that came to mind is, well, this is a truck of some kind. And then when you go to the back or to the side, you instantly get a completely different feel of, no, this can be a wagon. This is way less strong than that front looks in terms of I'm a big truck, and that might be because, well, we don't have the bumper bar at the rear sticking out properly, and well, this is all looking proper wagon, while at the front, the pure front view is quite hefty with the grille and everything, and also looks utilitarian to me.
Yeah, there is definitely an inconsistency from front to back it's hard to ignore now that you've pointed it out, and it's kind of all that I can see when I look back and forth between them.
I think just a quick general consensus here seems to be that it's a generally quite good design that misses in some places, that definitely drags it down a little bit, but overall there's a lot of really, really nice stuff here.
One thing that I just noticed that is quite interesting in terms of design choice, this little wing, well, it's not a wing, but above the rear window you have a bit of protection there. And I think that's a nice design touch. It's almost not noticeable, but it does add to the overall shape and does give it even more of a bit of a utilitarian nature. Maybe it's protection against stuff dangling from your roof racks or something.
I think they actually did that back in the day for aerodynamics, and also too, because it was a very large. I think the other reason too is to keep wind, like rain and dirt and stuff off it as you drove along. Because what happened is you kind of get that circulation pattern behind the vehicle. And something else I'd like to point out as being very period appropriate that I've only just noticed now is the exhaust treatment on this vehicle. You can't really see it very well from the 3/4 view, but it is there. But from the side view, it's just hidden off, like right underneath the rear fender, sort of halfway between the rear wheel and the rear bumper. That's exactly what they would have done in this time period, because they were all about the hidden exhausts in vehicles like this.
To mention that as well, actually, yeah, the very, very minor detail that you can't really normally see, but that is the exact point. Big thumbs up to the exhaust placement. Very, very period appropriate. Well done to that. It sits way too high, especially you can see on the front arch there. You can even see the suspension pieces in there. I also think that the car itself here is very flat, especially along the side. You've got a little kind of chrome line going from the rear fender there, but then it just kind of stops. The front, the bumper here is a bit too high. There's a big empty space below it, both on the front and the back. Though I can kind of excuse the back because it's got the taillights below it, which did happen, in fact, in the 70s and late 60s. Though I would have liked to see the lights rather integrated into the bumper, rather than just being kind of placed below them. Very, very tall antenna, now that I just looked at that as well. I would have maybe liked some more appropriate mirrors instead of the bullet mirrors. They seem perhaps a bit old. There's a chrome line running along over the hood line and the trunk, but not the roof. Maybe would have liked to see it go over the roof, so to kind of complete that. I think most of the fixture selection here is fairly era appropriate, but it looks very flat. There's kind of not enough going on here, and I think just the fact that it sits so high up off the ground, especially with those wheels as well, which are more 80s, 90s type wheels, it doesn't do it for me personally.
Yeah, I generally agree that there's the elements for what could be a very good design here. They're just not really fully realized, I don't think, really at any point. the front, like the front grille with the headlights integrated into that, and the little peak inside, that's a very cool detail. I like that. But I generally think that as you pointed out, the front bumper is too high, and while I appreciate them making an effort to match the bumper height, it didn't quite match up properly. The rear bumper is actually even higher still, which I don't think that's a particularly good look. If they had lowered the rear bumper just a little bit, and as you said, integrated the taillights into the bumper, which was a very period thing to do, this could have been really quite an interesting design to look at. I will give this design 10 out of 10 for the name though. Imperator. That is a cool name.
Yeah, sounds great to me. Well, this one is a little bit of a mixed bag, as you have already pointed out. Unfortunately, Mr. Imperator is a little squished on the front compared to the rear, where on the rear it is very nicely dominant, but on the front, not so much. And that could be the angle there but it just doesn't come across just right. One thing that I will say is that partially this almost approaches minimalist design in places, and the sleekness of it almost works for me. I get what you say when you say it's looking flat, and I have to agree with that, because that's when minimalist design doesn't quite turn out to work right. And maybe minimalist design isn't quite error correct either. One thing that could have broken it up a little bit is maybe adding an indicator on the sides. Something like that seems to be a good feature, somewhat useful too. And on the rear, what I do like is the clean look it gives, with the very stark badging there and the big name. Maybe the text underneath the badge is slightly too close and stuff, but then it is a very clean look. Not the most interesting look on the rear. The very square taillights there, and all fully integrated. I'm not necessarily a fan of that. There could have been some more detailing done to that. Overall, I think it is, on first sight, a pretty good looker, even though the detailing is lacking slightly.
I think something that could have improved the design significantly, if you swing to the side, simply adding a line that goes essentially just on the top of the fenders almost, where the lighting changes, just a line that follows through the car there. That would have, just doing that would have probably added a lot to the car, and then lowering it as well to be lower.
One thing that I would like to point out on top of all that is what I really dislike from the side view here is how inconsistent the fender height is. Like you were saying, the ride height overall is too high. I would say it is not overall too high necessarily, but it makes it seem so by the cutout for the front wheel being massive, while for the rear seemingly is pretty much alright. Yes, you could still lower it, of course, but I find that really weird. It looks like monster trucky from on the front and then normal on the rear. What do you think?
I think that's quite a good way to put it. Yeah, it was quite popular in the 50s, 60s, and 70s to kind of have the rear fender, the rear wheel arch a little lower, so that it would kind of encapsulate the rim a little bit. But I think, like you said, it should either be consistent, where both of them are the same height, or in this case of this car, it needs to be lowered so that the front end is proper, and then the rear end is kind of the wheel is kind of hidden by the fender.
I have a feeling I know what's gone on here with the ride height in this car, and I feel like it's a very common mistake that a lot of people make.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Uh-oh.
So this is a technical issue and it's a technical issue combined with a bit of a research issue, is that a lot of people have a very strong tendency to use solid axle front suspensions when they think about American cars, which couldn't be further from the truth. Your typical American car of this type would have a double wishbone suspension up front and a solid rear axle in the back. And the issue is in automation is that if you have a solid front axle, that jacks your ride height up and makes it so that you can't lower it beyond a certain amount. And that's really only appropriate for off-roaders and heavy-duty pickup trucks. And even then, not entirely appropriate for all types of those.
Personally, when I make a car, I start off with double wishbones, both front and back. I might go back and change it, but that gives me the full ride height slider, which even very early on in a design, getting the correct ride height helps a lot. That front door is longer than the rear, and it has happened, you know, sometimes in cars the rear doors are shorter, but I don't think it really works on a car that's this squared. And I think this one also kind of repeats a problem that we saw earlier on, where it's very much a luxury car. There's a lot of chrome detailing going on here, and you know, in these decades you can't really go wrong with chrome, but that rear bumper that kind of curves around to the side is very thick. I think that ends up being a bit much. The front, if you look at that, it's okay. I would say it's if you swing to the front real quick, there you go. It's okay. It's all right. I assume what's those lights in the grill there are supposed to be the indicators. Though they're white. Not entirely sure. The bumper feels a little flat. Perhaps could have maybe used another line. I feel like the headlight positioning is quite good, but it could have been done a little nicer. It kind of feels like they're just kind of shoved in there, so you get this slightly uneven line. The hood is a bit flat. Could have used a line through there as well. There's a line as well that goes from the top of the headlights and through the fender, but then it stops, and it excludes the doors before then continuing to the rear. I'm not really entirely sure why that is. Maybe the point here is for it to be completed by the chrome on the bottom of the doors and front fender, but I'm not entirely sure it really works. I would have personally just finished the line through the doors. So if you look at the back as well, I think this is a little nicer than the front, in my opinion anyway. The taillights are fairly appropriate, but the bumper is way too big. It's very thick, and if it's going to be that big, it needs something more than what it has. It can't just be a big flat piece of chrome. I think the writing as well there is a bit squished. The spacing is okay, perhaps maybe a bit wider would have been nicer, but they're a bit squished vertically. One thing that I do like, though, on the back here is the line that goes through the taillights is kind of completed through the middle as well. That's a nice little detail. I quite like that. So I think in an era where it's a bit hard to overdo the chrome, I think this one actually does overdo the chrome a little bit, or it doesn't really feel that cohesive, especially the door lines, and the absence of chrome on the top of the doors kind of bothers me.
I tend to agree with the somewhat inconsistent treatment of the side lines. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to have just terminate over the doors. You kind of expect it to continue one way or another. Not really the best look, I'd have to say. The other thing I'd like to point out with regards to the headlights is, at the time, and this is kind of a combination of a regulatory thing as it is an appearance thing. At the time, the headlights in the cars had a specified size, and the way that the headlights have been added to this car, it makes the car look enormous, because they do feel very small and they kind of get a little bit lost in their housings. The idea is great. I really like the way that looks. It's got a very sort of Buick Riviera kind of look, which is very cool. But the sizing, I think, is maybe not quite appropriate. Again, I have to echo the comments about the bumper, both front and rear, that they just don't really work very well. There's not enough detailing going on. They should be just something to catch the eye and especially draw it sort of side to side. Could have been improved a little bit there. I like the vinyl top. That's kind of a nice touch in black. And I also like the body color as well. I mean, it's very period appropriate, that burgundy metallic color. I will say that the interior being as light colored as it is, maybe the car would have benefited from having the glass transparency turned down just a little bit, because it is, especially from the side profile, it really has a habit of drawing your eye into the cabin, which is fine. It's a nice looking interior, but it's kind of taking away from the rest of the car a little bit. And again, from the rear, I have to agree with Secrane. A lot of his comments about how the rear I think is probably nicer than the front is probably true. I'm not really too convinced about how the reversing lights are integrated into the bumper though. That's a little bit weird.
I really do like the pillar-shaped headlights there, the stacked ones. They are so nicely integrated into that shape overall. I quite like that. And one thing that I find interesting, and I haven't seen so far, in the pure side view, you see those extensions of the bumper bars, but they basically act as big slabs of shape that you put on the side. And I think that's an interesting idea, and I don't think it's too terribly done here. One thing that is triggering my OCD a little bit is the different spacing in the gaps between the thick bottom line chrome there, where the front gap is about twice the size as the one between the doors. And yeah, I also tend to agree with it's a little odd that the line doesn't run all the way to the handlebars there, or to the door handles, I mean. Other than that, I think the color choice and everything really nice. But we do have large areas, once again, which have absolutely nothing on there. Could you switch to the straight rear, and after that to the straight front? Like this rear, there's nothing going on there on the big trunk area. And from the rear side and so on, you can see that even more. And from the front, you have the massive hood and absolutely nothing on there. And even more extreme here, it is even an almost perfectly flat surface.
Yeah, I agree that there's definitely something going on in the hood. A lot more going on in the hood. Something else that I find a little bit odd is I probably would have had some sort of badging on the front. Like there's no manufacturer badging, there's no model badging or anything on the front, and it looks a little weird without it.
This would certainly have done really well with just the addition of a nice hood ornament and some text in there, maybe in the grille, only on one side to break the monotony.
This car already gets quite a few points for the creativity. It's very forward-looking from what I assume is the mid to late 1950s. It's kind of a bathtub type shape to the cabin, which was quite popular in concept cars at the time. I quite like the fins and the way they're kind of integrated from the rear door and all the way to the back. I really like the white line that goes from the side and all the way to the back and is then completed in the bumper, which I believe house the reverse lights. They're a little bit big, but I like that idea a lot. I think maybe the taillight housing here is a bit simplistic. Maybe some more, fin. Maybe if they were integrated into the fins or something that would have made it a little nicer. If you swing around to the front as well, it doesn't quite. It's like we saw earlier with another car. The rear is better than the front, in my opinion. Here, it's got some okay stuff going on here. It's got an appropriately sized bumper. It's got some marker lights there, and it's got 4 headlights. I think the spacing on the headlights might be a bit wide. If they were to be that wide, I probably would have separated them better instead of just having that continuous grille mesh in the back. But overall, I think it's definitely a very forward-looking type car. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on. I could mention the wheels as well. Those are too modern. I would have just picked some more conventional type hubcaps. They were popular even on concept cars. And I also, once again, as we saw on the last car, in fact, that chrome line that goes out from the front and from the back is kind of just cut off. It does work a little bit better here because it doesn't take it quite as far, but I would have just completed that line. So overall, it's a very forward-looking car for the time, and there's a lot of really cool stuff going on, so a lot of points for creativity. But I think, again, the detailing, for example, that front grille appears to be, the grille casing appears to be just one fixture. I think it would have been better if it had been, if the details were done a little nicer. Though also, last point, big props to the color scheme. The blue and white, I think, mesh together quite well. Maybe not quite as metallic as we see here, but those colors do go very appropriately together for the 1950s.
Yeah, I agree. The color scheme on this car is absolutely fantastic. It's 100% what you'd expect to see in a car of this era. And it's funny that with the fins on this car, you could almost put an exact year on it just by looking at it. Like this is I'm going to say this is 1959, because this is sort of right after the fins were starting to die off, and they were kind of, it's very reminiscent of especially the Chevy Impala of the era. It's a really very nice rear end. I agree. I like how the interior of the car feels like it's a good match with the rest of it, and you can actually see that it's impeccably matched and impeccably designed. Again, a bit of a shame that we're not really giving marks to the interiors for cars, because this would definitely get full marks for that. I like how the roof is treated in this car, both with the sort of the strange sunroof, but also just how the roof kind of floats up above the various pillars. It's very concepty and very cool. I quite like that. I will echo what Secrane said about the chrome strip that runs from basically the center of the headlights at the front to the center of the taillights and taillight fixture at the rear. It probably could have gone a bit further. Even if it terminated basically at where the door openings were, I think that would be a much improved look overall. The front bumper is maybe a little bit on the plain side, and I think the front could probably have used a little bit more. It just needs more pizzazz overall. Like it's most of the way there. It just feels like it's lacking something. Whether it's a little bit more of a breakup of the shape, or a couple more details here and there, or maybe just some changes to the bumper, which I'm not really convinced is really very appropriate for the car. But yeah, generally it's like 90% of the way there to being a perfect car, but it does have a few flaws here and there, I'd have to say, overall.
I think this car is a prime example of it only getting better as you turn around. It is quite mundane from the front there, and I especially do not like how little I can see the writing on this one. It could have been a lot more prominent, and otherwise the front also looks a little plump with the grille there. I do enjoy the triple headlight look to it, but something is missing here, and I think that something is a little bit of indicator color, which would very nicely contrast to the color of the car. I think that could have been used to a great effect here. And then towards the sides, I think that is really beautifully done. If you were looking at this from a slightly lower angle than this, the sideline, the lower sideline, that is the big white strip that runs along the sides of the car, would have the same thickness as the top line of the white of the roof. And I think that's a great choice. Overall, also giving you a little bit of this rocket feeling with how the line is terminated, with the nice text at the front. I think that's beautiful. And then towards the rear, I think we have, at least to me, that is pretty much perfection in terms of how the fins are terminated. The shape over there, with the 3D fixture use on the inside to make it a little smoother instead of having a hard termination on the inside of those, is fantastically done. And the having those white sidelines in the 3/4 rear view terminate into fins on the lower side also I think is pure brilliance there. Overall, I really like this look, and I think something more could have been done there with indicator color, because it's such a nice contrast color. And the last thing I want to point out is the interior color choice there should have been made a little darker, because it's a different material that is not as reflective, looks more plasticky. If you make it a little darker, it better matches the color of the car as a whole. Right now, it looks much more like candy inside and has a brighter tone to it, even though it hasn't. And that is a bit unfortunate, because the interior is utter brilliance.
I agree with what you both said. It gets better and better as you get towards the rear, and I think it does a lot of really cool stuff. Especially on the rear, as we see there, those bottom fins as well. I really dig those. But I think it lacks a little bit in the fine detailing, especially on the front. I think the front is a little lackluster compared to the rear.
I think this car probably could have benefited from continuing the chrome tip of the rear fins all the way around to basically where it terminates at the door. It would have been a little bit gaudy, but I think that's absolutely perfect for a car of this era. So that is a wrap for Category C. Thank you for our special judge Secrane for joining us for this event. I hope he enjoyed it as much as we did.
It's been a pleasure, for sure.
All right, fantastic.
And that concludes this category. A big thanks to our guest for joining us, and thank you for watching. Check out the links below and subscribe to the channel to not miss any of the competition videos.